Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss Senate Bill 1582, the Genius Act. I believe that this legislation, as it is currently drafted, is fundamentally flawed. It exposes taxpayers, consumers, and the financial system to unacceptable risk. And it creates venues for criminals, terrorists, and rogue governments to finance their illicit activities. Despite these dangerous flaws, we will not have the opportunity to offer one single substantive amendment. And the legislative process, I think, would require, with a bill of this significance and nature, a very vigorous amendment process. This legislation before us places the government's stamp of approval on so-called stable coins, which are crypto dollars that could be minted by anyone: Amazon, Walmart, Facebook, X, the Trump family, and even foreign companies. It gives stablecoin issuers an enormous privilege, a U.S. government license to effectively create dollars without demanding very much of anything in return. And here's how the business works. You give a stablecoin company $1. The company gives you back an IOU that is recorded on a blockchain. The stablecoin company takes your dollar and invests it in various assets that generate interest and yield. The company keeps that interest and yield, but it is supposed to give you back your dollar whenever you ask for it. You can also take the IOU, which you receive for your dollar, and transfer it to other people, and you can use it to buy other things, mostly other crypto. If this sounds similar to a bank, that's because it is. Banks allow customers to send and receive money. Stable coins allow customers to do the same thing, just outside the banking system and purportedly in a faster and cheaper way. Now, competition can force banks to do a better job, and it should be more convenient for consumers to transfer funds. However, I believe that competition should come from the merits of the product and the underlying technology, not from regulatory arbitrage as provided in the Genius Act. The light touch regulatory regime in this bill is premised on two faulty assumptions. First, it assumes customer funds are safe because they are fully reserved with one-to-one backing of all customer liabilities. And second, it assumes that stablecoin issuers are inherently risk-free because they engage in only one activity, issuing stablecoins. But experience tells us that these kinds of assumptions are flawed. During the 2008 financial crisis, we saw institutions with very similar, if not exact, characteristics fail and get billions in taxpayer bailouts. We were assured that money market funds were low risk because they were fully reserved with shares pegged to $1. We were assured that derivatives were innovative tools that didn't need heavy-handed regulation. And we were assured that Fannie and Freddie were safe because they engaged in one simple business. However, taxpayers needed to backstop $2 trillion in money market fund liabilities. The government gave AIG, an insurance company involved with derivatives, a $200 billion bailout. And taxpayers still stand behind $8 trillion in Fannie and Freddie liabilities. Now, Mr. President, I do not believe it is appropriate to apply the full spectrum of banking regulations to stablecoins, but many more elements of the banking laws and the money transmission laws must be imported into this bill in order to make it work. There are dozens of sensible and basic rules that apply to similar firms that handle people's money. The Genius Bill says that stablecoin companies no longer need to comply with many of these consumer protection laws. Instead, they can comply with a federal framework containing very few of them. Now, let me highlight a few specifics that I think the public should be aware of. First, stablecoin companies could operate with near zero capital. The bill says that capital requirements shall not exceed what is sufficient to maintain the ongoing operations of the issue. This established a ceiling, not a floor, not a minimal level of capital that regulators would deem appropriate given the business activities. This repeats the mistakes of the 1990s and the 2000s, when non-bank financial institutions like Lehman Brothers operated with barely 3% capital ratios. When the firm got in trouble, there was no cushion to bear losses. Customers and taxpayers had to step in. And strong capital is critical. Indeed, in March 2023, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, taxpayers bailed out the uninsured deposits of a stablecoin company to the tune of $3.3 billion. Second, the audit requirement is calibrated so narrowly that it does not cover a single existing stablecoin company, not one. Independent audits make it harder for companies to cook the books or dip into customer funds. I can't imagine why we wouldn't require these types of audit for stablecoin companies holding vast amounts of cash and securities. Third, there are no merger or change in control rules. These rules, if in place, could prohibit felons convicted of financial crimes and fraud from acquiring a stablecoin issuer. Now, with this bill, if it passes, they can go ahead and acquire them. Fourth, the enforcement provisions are dangerously weak. The government will need to wait until wrongdoing has already occurred before it can act. It would be powerless to intervene early to prevent people from getting harmed in the first place. And even then, there is no power for regulators to revoke a company's charter. If one of these companies brazenly mishandles customer funds, the regulators will not have adequate tools to stop them. Fifth, when a stablecoin company fails, it must go through ordinary bankruptcy. And that, I believe, is a mistake. We've seen other crypto firms like FTX and Celsius go bankrupt recently. Customers have been waiting for many, many months, and in some cases years, to get their money back. Instead, we should set up a bank-like resolution regime guaranteeing that customers immediately get their money back up to a limit. And the industry should pay for that insurance to satisfy those customers who have been denied their funds. Sixth, regulators have no express authority to issue new rules to address emerging threats as they arise. Without the ability to issue updated rules, the Genius Act will become outdated very quickly. And given the speed of innovation and acceleration in all areas, particularly financially, these regulations would probably be out of date maybe within a year or less. Together, these flaws make the Genius Bill worse than the status quo. And that brings me to what I consider one of the biggest problems in the legislation, the effect on national security. Genius allows foreign-based stablecoin companies to operate freely in the United States. Today, the world's largest stablecoin, in other words, the world's largest crypto dollar, is issued not in the United States, but in El Salvador. The stablecoin is called Tether, and it is the biggest beneficiary of this bill. And let me tell you a bit about Tether. Tether was fined by U.S. regulators in 2021 for misleading customers into thinking that their funds were fully backed. Despite this misconduct, Tether has never undergone an audit, and this bill would not require one. Tether is used by North Korea. According to FBI indictments in 2023, North Korean IT workers have, quote, obtained illegal employment in the tech and crypto industry and then asked to be paid in stable coins like Tether. After receiving payments, they funneled their earnings back to North Korea, close quote. According to the government reports, North Korea has used at least $5 billion of stolen crypto to fund its weapons of mass destruction programs. This comprises between 40% and 50% of its budget for these programs. Tether is also used by terrorists. According to the Treasury Department's 2024 National Terrorist Financing Risk Assessment, quote, ISIS and other terrorist groups have moved towards using stablecoins, including Tether, to move or store funds. In October 2023, the Senator for Wyoming asked then Attorney General Garland to open up a criminal investigation into Tether because it has, quote, facilitated significant illicit finance activity, including significant terrorism financing for Hamas's malviolent attack on Israel. And Tether is used by Russian arms dealers. According to testimony before the Banking Committee by the Deputy Treasury Secretary in 2024, we've seen Russia increasingly turning to alternative payment mechanisms, including the stablecoin Tether, to try to circumvent our sanctions and continue to finance its war machine in Ukraine. Tether is also used for human trafficking, scams, and frauds. According to a report published by the United Nations in 2024, Tether, quote, has become a preferred choice for South Asian cyber fraud operations and money launderers alike due to its stability and the ease, anonymity, and low fees of its transactions. During a single year, from the middle of 2022 through the middle of 2023, a blockchain analysis company uncovered $17 billion of Tether transactions connected to various criminal activities, including human trafficking and romance scams. And the list goes on. Iranian diplomats, Venezuelan oil companies, drug traffickers, ransomware attackers, all are drawn to Tether and other cryptocurrency. Under the Genius Bill, Tether could be offered and sold in the United States without being required to meet any U.S. anti-money laundering or sanctions compliance requirements. Tether would just need to demonstrate the ability to freeze its coins if they fall into the wrong hands, a technological capability that Tether already has and that it has apparently refused to use because it still tolerates illicit activity. Tether would not be subject to full-blown licensure and supervision. Tether will instead need to meet home country requirements in El Salvador that are comparable to U.S. requirements. But this term is ill-defined and may be materially weaker than the standards in the United States. In fact, I would suggest those standards are probably highly subjective given the arrangements we've seen in El Salvador with its president and its legal system. And these weak restrictions will not even kick in for 3 years after enactment. That means business as usual for Tether and other cryptocurrencies. It means more, practically speaking, WMD proliferation, more Iranian oil sales, more Russian arms deals, more tax evasion, more black market drug sales, and more human trafficking. Further, if Tether chooses not to meet these bare requirements, then it could not be offered or sold on centralized trading venues in the United States. But there is a huge exception allowing Tether to offer its stablecoins in the United States through decentralized trading venues, also known as DeFi. DeFi platforms are exactly where North Korea trades crypto and where the bulk of illicit activity occurs. According to the Treasury Department, North Korea laundered at least $455 million in stolen crypto on just one DeFi platform called Tornado Cash as of 2022. Last year, North Korea laundered at least $147 million through the same platform. If these trades occurred with real dollars in real banks, the government would have tools to stop them. But because these trades occur using foreign-issue crypto dollars outside the banking system, the government lacks these tools, and the Genius Act would not give them those tools. As we place in effect, or by default, the U.S. government stamp of approval on Tether, I think it's entirely sensible to be providing Treasury with new authorities to address how Tether is used for illegal purposes around the world. We should also be looking at the stronger approach taken in Europe, where Tether may not be offered or sold, full stop, unless it is fully licensed and meets all EU laws. If someone is in the business of creating dollars in any form, they should be subject to the full U.S. jurisdiction. If someone creates a platform that is used by North Korea to launder stolen dollar alternatives, they should be within the reach of U.S. sanctioned laws. I hope Republicans and Democrats can at least agree on that. But this bill does not respect these common sense principles. Last Congress, the Department of the Treasury sent up a legislative package with new authorities to crack down on Tether. The Deputy Secretary testified before the Banking Committee about that package. I worked across the aisle with Senators Warner, Rounds, and Romney on legislation to implement some of these provisions. Unfortunately, we could not get it enacted. The bill before us contains none of these provisions. I have filed an amendment to provide these tools to Treasury, but regrettably, as I've indicated before, we will not have an opportunity to vote on any amendments. Mr. President, there's another aspect of this bill normalizing the operation of Tether. It turns out that Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, has millions of dollars in financial interests tied to Tether. The investment bank Cantor Fitzgerald, that Mr. Lutnick ran and owned, manages Tether's reserves and generates millions of dollars in fees. Cantor has provided Tether with working capital through a hybrid debt equity investment. It has been reported that Cantor owns 5% of Tether, a stake worth millions of dollars. Cantor and Tether have just announced a new Bitcoin fund for retail investors. Now, Mr. Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, and someone that will have, I think, some influence in how this bill is regulated or turned out, says he is divested from Cantor. But what he has really done is turned ownership and control over to his adult children who are in their 20s. Now, I invite the American people to judge for themselves whether Mr. Lutnick no longer has any financial exposure or business ties with Tether. And just a few months ago, the Trump family began issuing a stablecoin called USD1. This token has already been used by a foreign government to funnel money to Trump. Let me say that again. A foreign government has funneled money to the President of the United States. It turns out an Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund made a $2 billion investment in a crypto company called Binance. But instead of using real dollars, they used USD1, the Trump cryptocurrency. That raises, I think, serious questions about a president of the United States receiving significant millions of dollars from a foreign country. And rather than doing something about the president's obvious conflicts, the bill expressly affirms that he is able to call his stablecoin USD1. There is actually a provision, green line of this name. We have given legislatively the president sole use of this name for his benefit, his financial benefit. And the bill empowers the president's hand-picked regulators to write the rules that will govern the stablecoin business. By authorizing money creation by shadowy offshore firms associated with the President of the United States and the Secretary of Commerce, this bill undermines our economy's most valuable asset, if not immediately, then I think eventually, and that's the US dollar. The dollar is the world's reserve currency because the United States is considered stable, predictable, an open society with a strong rule of law that countries and businesses want to trade and partner with. When the United States becomes less stable, less predictable, and less open, when politically connected people get special treatment, when Congress normalizes financial self-aggrandizement by the president, all of that makes the dollar less attractive and makes this country look like a third world despot. However, proponents claim this bill strengthens the dollar by stimulating demand for Treasury securities. But that cannot be justified at this point by the data. The entire stablecoin market is only 0.01% of the Treasury market. And according to an investor letter from the Elliott Hedge Fund, now that firm is run by a major Republican donor, so I don't think this is a partisan description, the dollar that enjoys an immense advantage as the world's reserve currency. But they point out if the U.S. government encourages adoption of crypto alternatives, that will, quote, marginalize the dollar and be, quote, profoundly dangerous. Even as legislation would modestly strengthen the dollar, it could not offset the erosion to the dollar that the administration is engineering through complementary actions like sky-high tariffs and a trade embargo on China. And it could accelerate the erosion of the dollar if one day stablecoins become legal tender. For example, legal tender that can be used to pay taxes. And it wouldn't surprise me if one day the president sat at his desk and wrote a presidential order that crypto can pay taxes. I offered actually an amendment in the committee which would prohibit this by declaring that the legal tender of the United States was the dollar. And the amendment was defeated. Mr. President, we need to apply real guardrails that will protect consumers and provide real tools for our national security agencies to address this new technology. Real guardrails and real tools, not words on a page that give the false appearance of protection when things go wrong. I would urge my colleagues to oppose this fundamentally flawed bill. And Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, 10 years feels like a lifetime ago. In May of 2015, I had just returned from serving a tour in Afghanistan and had just started my campaign, my very first campaign for Congress. But not even a few weeks later, on this day, June 16th, 10 years ago today, Donald Trump came down that golden escalator in Trump Tower in New York City and changed American politics forever. He took the Republican Party and the country by storm, and our country is better off for it. No one in the history of this country has dominated American politics for an entire decade like Donald Trump has, and it has been a wild ride. The Republican Party is better off because of that. Our country is better off today because of that, too. Remember when President Trump came down that golden escalator, we were in the political wilderness. Republicans hadn't won a national election in 12 years. And Republican experts, you might recall, gathered in 2013 to do an autopsy report. And what did they say? They said the best way to win a national election was to embrace amnesty. Boy, were they wrong. Mr. President, it may seem like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't too long ago when Republicans and Democrats in this chamber were working together to pass so-called comprehensive immigration reform, or also known as amnesty. Remember the Gang of Eight. But President Trump shifted us away from that ideology and that mindset. He changed the Republican Party from one that wanted to pass amnesty to one that would fight to save jobs from illegal labor. Donald Trump was the first Republican in my lifetime to say that immigration should put the interest of the American workers first and foremost. It's one of the reasons that he was so different from other Republicans back in 2015 and 2016 when he came down that escalator talking about putting American workers first. It turns out, Mr. President, that all working class voters, whether they were black or white, Latino or Asian, all they wanted was a shot at the American dream for themselves and their kids, just like every other generation of Americans had before them. And today, the new Republican Party is that multiracial working class coalition thanks to Donald Trump. Working class Americans are now the backbone of the GOP. And those are the men and women that President Trump stands up for every day and fights for, and I'm proud to stand up with him. And it wasn't that long ago as well that leaders in both the Republican and the Democrat Party ignored the fact that China was ripping off our country and stealing jobs from American workers. Those same experts who assured us that allowing China into the World Trade Organization and establishing permanent normal trading relations with China would gradually turn the communist China into a liberal democracy. Once again, they couldn't have been any more wrong than what they were. The political class completely ignored communist China's ambition to destroy our manufacturing base. For decades, they stood by and watched as China stole our American technology, copied our products, broke trade rules, and built entire industries on the backs of slave labor. They supported a trade system that made our country poor and more dependent on our enemies abroad. President Trump, from the moment he came down that golden escalator, recognized that this was a bad deal for American families, workers, and for our national security. In fact, at one of his very first campaign stops in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I'm from, he used stronger language about China than any other political leader before him. In his first term, President Trump rewrote the national security strategy and named China a national security threat for the very first time. And this time around, President Trump's trade agenda is working. His tariffs are already bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. and encouraging companies to invest trillions in American manufacturing and getting out of China instead. In the last few months, thanks to this president's America First agenda, we've seen Honda announcing that they're going to build their next generation Civic in Greensburg, Indiana. General Motors announced it would increase truck production in Fort Wayne. Eli Lilly plans to invest $27 billion in American manufacturing. Novartis also just announced a $23 billion investment in their American facilities, creating more good-paying jobs for Hoosiers. President Trump's policies are strengthening Americans' economy and bringing critical manufacturing back home while weakening China's economy. Imports from China have already dropped 35%, and China's economy is struggling because of it. And President Trump has got their attention. The Chinese are begging him to make a deal. He is the first president you see in my lifetime to understand China's economic and military threat. Every president before President Trump played footsie with China. But President Trump is the only person tough enough to be in that negotiating room with communist China. We finally have a president who is putting American workers and their families that they provide for first. Our country is stronger and more secure because of it. No other president since Reagan has done more to protect our national security. President Trump projects peace through strength and puts the American people's interests first in our foreign policy as well. He is rebuilding our national defense and our industrial base after his predecessors depleted it. He got our NATO allies to step up to the plate and invest more in their collective defense when other presidents tried and failed to do the same thing. And President Trump is the greatest peacemaker of my lifetime. He is the only president not to get our country into a new war in the last 4 decades. Our enemies respect us again. They fear us. Our allies respect us. The American foreign policy is working because President Trump rejected the failed thinking of the past. Mr. President, I thank God that President Trump came down that escalator 10 years ago today. It is a date that we should all mark on our calendar and never forget. American politics hasn't been the same since. I don't think it ever will be again, and for the better. And for all the reasons that I've already mentioned, our country is stronger and more united today. Our workers and families are better off. Our streets are safer, and opportunity and the American dream is within reach. The American people are charting our country's future again. Not China, not the elites, not multinational corporations, the American people. It's a new direction, and it never would have happened without President Trump's leadership and coming down that escalator 10 years ago today. Mr. President, I'm proud to stand with President Trump. I yield back.